Blood, sand, steel, the roar of the crowd, life hanging on the thumb of a spectator. In the arena, no mercy, only glory or death. In this video, we explore the true story of Roman gladiators, not the one in the movies, often romanticized and simplified for narrative needs, but the one made of incessant sweat, iron discipline imposed by unscrupulous lanisti, unheard of cruelty both in training and in combat, and the constant struggle for survival in a ruthless environment. Who were these men and women who entertained incalculable crowds? Where did they come from? What were their stories before taking up arms in the arena? And why has their myth, steeped in violence and fascination, survived for 2,000 years, continuing to populate our collective imagination? Gladiator, a professional fighter in ancient Rome. The word itself conjures up images of brute strength and desperate courage. Their origins lie in ancient traditions. Gladiators originally performed at funerals in the Etruscans, a civilization that preceded and influenced Rome, probably with the intention of providing the deceased not only with honors, but also with a sort of armed escort for his journey to the afterlife. For this reason, ritual combats were usually to the death, a bloody sacrifice to accompany the deceased to his new kingdom. In Rome, these performances began as private events linked to funerary rites, but their intrinsically spectacular nature meant that they became extremely popular, gradually transforming into grandiose public events and growing exponentially in size and pomp. From the first recorded show in 264 BC, with only 3 pairs of fighters, organized at the funeral of one Marcus Junius Brutus Pera, they went up to the astonishing numbers of 300 pairs at the time of the height of Julius Caesar's power, died 44 BC, a number that testifies to the growing political and social importance of these games. The spectacles extended from single days to lavish celebrations lasting up to 100 days, as happened under the reign of Emperor Titus on the occasion of the inauguration of the Colosseum, an arena designed specifically to host such events on a monumental scale. The Emperor Trajan, to celebrate his triumph in 107 AD after his victories in Dacia, organized fights that saw 5,000 pairs of gladiators take to the arena, a spectacle of unimaginable ferocity and grandeur. Similar spectacles, though often smaller in scale, were also offered in many other cities of the Roman Empire, attesting to the diffusion of this form of entertainment and its deep roots in popular culture, as demonstrated by the impressive remains of numerous amphitheaters scattered throughout the territory conquered by Rome. Gladiatorial combats thus originated as private funeral rituals, called munera, a Latin term meaning gifts or offerings given to the deceased by the family to honor them, and according to the beliefs of the time, appease the infernal deities and the spirits of the dead. Originally, they were bloody duels celebrated in a strictly family context, but over time, their ability to attract and involve the public was noticed by rising political figures. These events gradually transformed into powerful instruments of political consensus, skillfully used to curry favor with the people and demonstrate one's generosity and magnificence. Offering increasingly grandiose and spectacular games meant gaining popularity among the plebs, increasing one's political influence within Roman institutions, and instilling fear in one's opponents, demonstrating the ability to mobilize enormous resources. There were a surprising variety of gladiator classes, each carefully distinguished by their specific weaponry and the particular ways they fought in the arena, creating ever new and interesting clashes for the public. The Samnites, who took their name from an ancient Italic people who had long been enemies of Rome, fought with weapons that recalled their warrior tradition. A large oblong shield that offered considerable protection, a bronze helmet often adorned with colored feathers and equipped with a visor to protect the face, and a short sword, ideal for close combat. The Thracians, originally from the Balkan region, were recognizable by their lighter and more agile equipment. They carried a small round shield that allowed them to move quickly, and a curved, sickle-like dagger, called a sika, a treacherous weapon designed to strike with the edge. The Thracians were usually pitted against the Myrmidons, gladiators armed in the Gallic style, with a visored helmet often decorated with the stylized figure of a fish, hence the name derived from the Greek mormilos, a type of fish, a sturdy sword, and a large rectangular shield. This pairing often represented the clash between agility and brute force. The retiarius, perhaps the most iconic and distinctive class of gladiator, fought with deliberately light and unconventional equipment. He was armed with a net with which he tried to trap his opponent, a sharp trident for striking from a distance and a small dagger for close defense. He wore no helmet or heavy shield, relying on speed and cunning. The retiarius was typically pitted against the secutor, a heavily armored gladiator specifically designed to withstand the retiarius's attacks. He wore a smooth, enveloping helmet without a brim to avoid getting caught in the net, a short sword, and a rectangular shield. This duel was a veritable choreography of movement, a deadly dance between the treacherous trap and armored resistance, an example of pure strategic violence. There were also many other categories of gladiators, each with its own peculiarities. The Andabatai, wrapped in armor that also covered the face and perhaps fought completely blindfolded, adding an element of blind fury and unpredictability to the fight. The Dimicheri were agile fighters who wielded two short blades, one in each hand, requiring great coordination and speed. The Esadari fought boldly on moving chariots, reminiscent of ancient battles between warriors on chariots. The Hoplamachi were real human tanks, covered in heavy bronze armor that protected them from head to toe, leaving only a few vulnerable points exposed. The Laqueari, armed with a noose or a rope with a loop, with which they attempted to immobilize the opponent before striking him, almost recalled the image of the cowboys of antiquity. Each category of gladiator was carefully chosen, studied and trained based on the fighter's natural build, speed of movement, and instinctive fighting style, in order to maximize his abilities in the arena. Gladiatorial schools, known as ludi, singular ludus, were enclosed, often prison-like places characterized by a harsh environment, inflexible military discipline, and Spartan living conditions. Gladiators, often prisoners of war, condemned slaves or criminals, but sometimes also free men seeking fame or money, swore the Sacramentum Gladiatorium, a solemn oath by which they consciously accepted an existence of hunger, brutal corporal punishment such as whippings, often serious wounds, and death as the potential outcome of every fight. Training was ruthless and relentless. It began with preparatory exercises against the palus, a sturdy wooden pole stuck into the ground, which served as a simulacrum of the opponent. Then, day after day, they progressed through increasingly realistic exercises, often using real but blunt weapons under the watchful and stern gaze of the doctors, the specialized instructors. Veteran gladiators, survivors of countless battles, had a crucial role in instructing novices, transmitting to them the most effective fighting techniques, the secrets to anticipate the opponent's moves, and, above all, the brutal art of survival in a hostile environment, a knowledge passed down with the bloodshed, the sweat of exhausting training, and the resigned silence of those who knew the price of defeat. Imagine dawn breaking the silence in the ludus. The heavy wood and iron gates creak open with an ominous creak, and the cold morning air carries with it the acrid iron odor of newly sharpened weapons and the stale stench of sweat and dried blood. The heavy rhythmic footsteps of the gladiators' sandals as they move in formation echo across the dusty ground of the inner courtyard. They exchange fleeting, tense glances, but few words are spoken. The dull sound of wooden swords clashing during exercises is the eerie soundtrack to the start of a new day of preparation for death. None of the fighters are sure if they will see another sunrise beyond the walls of the ludus. Yet despite the brutality of their condition, it was not all misery and despair for gladiators. Some of them, thanks to their skill and charisma in the arena, became real celebrities, acclaimed and idolized by the public. Roman matrons, often bored by the rigidity of married life, even neglected their husbands to send passionate letters and love tokens to their gladiator idols. Graffiti found on the walls of Pompeii, frozen in time by the eruption of Vesuvius, testify to this popular veneration, with inscriptions calling some gladiators the delight of women and beloved of the people. Sudden fame, the huge sums of money earned from victories, and the attention of the female public were the real and powerful rewards of their skill and courage in the arena, an incentive to risk their lives in every fight. The gladiator's diet was carefully studied and calibrated to the millimeter to ensure maximum strength and physical endurance. It consisted mainly of legumes, such as lentils and beans, whole grains, barley, and dried fruit such as figs. Meat consumption was surprisingly limited, probably to favor muscular endurance rather than pure mass. A fundamental element of their diet was vinegar, which was consumed in large quantities, perhaps for its anti-inflammatory properties, and to strengthen tendons and ligaments, subjected to enormous stress during training and combat. The ideal physique of a gladiator was not that of a sculpted Greek statue, focused on aesthetics, but rather that of a robust and resistant fighter, capable of withstanding prolonged efforts and violent blows. Expert physicians, including the famous Galen, who later became personal physician to the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, closely followed the gladiatorial schools, treating wounds and applying what can be considered the first sports medicine techniques in history, developing methods for rehabilitation and injury prevention. Gladiatorial shows were announced days in advance through colorful posters in public places, loud proclamations in crowded markets, and even through the excited stories of children eagerly awaiting the event. On the fateful day, the atmosphere in the city was electric. The gladiators, dressed in colorful tunics, paraded in a solemn procession through the streets, accompanied by music and cheers from the crowd, until they reached the arena. Here, they presented themselves to the emperor or the organizer of the games, greeting him with a formal bow before retreating to the underground to prepare mentally and physically for the impending battle. A sort of warm-up would then begin, often a mock fight with blunt weapons to show off their skills to the public. Then, suddenly, a tense silence would fall. The blaring sound of a trumpet announced the start of the real fight, the moment when the pretense gave way to the brutal reality of the fight for life. Some gladiators showed signs of fear, their faces pale and their hands shaking. Others, veterans hardened by countless battles, faced the arena with a mocking smile or a nervous laugh. Anyone who hesitated or showed reluctance to fight was immediately punished by the guards, often whipped or even branded with red-hot irons to spur them on to fight. When a gladiator fell to the ground, defeated but not yet dead, he raised the index finger of his right hand, a conventional gesture to implore the missio, mercy. At this point, the fate of the fighter was in the hands of the excited audience. The crowd, with an eloquent gesture, expressed its verdict. White handkerchiefs waved in the air begged for mercy, invoking clemency for the defeated gladiator. The infamous thumbs down, on the other hand, decreed death. However, the exact interpretation of this gesture is still a matter of debate among scholars today. According to some sources, the thumb pointing down meant, "Let him fall, therefore kill him." But according to other interpretations, a thumb pointing toward the chest of the dying opponent meant, "Strike here," indicating the vital point to be pierced. What the true meaning of this iconic gesture was, we will probably never know for sure. The Romans, in general, did not fear death with the same horror with which we regard it today. They saw it as a natural part of the cycle of life, an inevitable passage and, in certain circumstances, even glorious. Dying while fighting with honor in the arena was considered by many a privilege, a final display of courage and virtue in front of thousands of spectators. Those who fell well, with dignity and without showing cowardice, were remembered with respect, sometimes even with admiration. Those who whimpered, begged for mercy in an unworthy manner, or surrendered without fighting with honor were scorned and mocked by the crowd. Even the manner of dying, the composure and courage shown in the last moments, were an integral part of the spectacle and contributed to the public's judgment on the value of the gladiator. If a gladiator managed to survive a sufficient number of fights and demonstrated perseverance and courage, he could obtain freedom, symbolized by the delivery of the ludus, a wooden sword. However, not all freed gladiators chose to abandon the arena. Some, paradoxically, decided to return to fight voluntarily, attracted by the fame, money, and excitement of combat. For them, the arena was not only a place of death, but also a stage where they felt truly alive, where they could demonstrate their value and enjoy the adoration of the public. Not all those who fought in the arena were slaves or prisoners. There was also a category of voluntary gladiators, called octorati. They were often free men who had fallen into financial ruin, ambitious young men seeking glory and fortune, and even, in rare cases, members of the Roman aristocracy who had fallen from grace and saw the arena as an opportunity to redeem themselves or escape an otherwise hopeless life. And surprisingly, there were also female gladiators, the gladiatrices. Their existence is attested by some historical sources and archaeological finds, although they fought less frequently than men, often at night or in shows considered more exotic and memorable. In Ostia, the ancient port of Rome, a funerary inscription commemorates a man named Hostilianus, who was the first to bring women to fight in the arena. Of all the gladiators who have walked the bloody sands, Spartacus is undoubtedly the most famous. A rebellious slave of Thracian origin, trained as a gladiator at the school of Capua, Spartacus managed to escape along with other companions and lead one of the largest and most dangerous slave revolts in Roman history, a conflict that shook the very foundations of the Republic. For years, his legions of rebels inflicted heavy defeats on the Roman armies, demonstrating unexpected military cunning and courage. His dream of freedom for the slaves of Italy finally shattered on the battlefield, where Spartacus met his death, and his followers were crucified along the Appian Way as a warning to anyone who dared to challenge the power of Rome. But despite his tragic end, his name was never forgotten, becoming in the centuries that followed a symbol of resistance and the fight for freedom. Gladiators were a constant presence in Roman daily life. They could be seen in the large arenas that dotted the urban landscape, but also in the markets, where large sums could be bet on their fights, and even engraved on the walls in the form of graffiti, often accompanied by phrases of admiration or proclamations of their valor. They were ambivalent symbols, embodying both courage and cruelty, the honor of combat and the brutality of death. They were loved and hated, feared and respected, paid handsomely for their performances and idolized as heroes by the people. Even figures of the highest social rank, such as the eccentric Emperor Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, delighted in personally entering the arena, dressed as gladiators, and fighting against wild animals or opponents of lower rank. He certainly did not do it out of necessity or to demonstrate courage, but rather out of vanity and to indulge his thirst for popularity, often scandalizing the Roman nobility. With the progressive spread of Christianity and the new moral values it promoted, the bloody spectacle of gladiatorial combat slowly began to lose its appeal among a part of the population. Some Christian emperors tried to limit their diffusion and finally to abolish them altogether. Constantine was one of the first to move in this direction, trying to prohibit them as early as 325 AD, although with little success. Almost a century later, the Emperor Honorius tried again to eradicate this practice so deeply rooted in Roman culture. However, the games continued to be organized, albeit with less frequency and pomp, perhaps until the 6th century AD, when the changed social and political conditions of the Western Roman Empire led to their definitive disappearance. And today, centuries after their disappearance, gladiators are still surprisingly present in our collective imagination. We find them everywhere, in epic films that narrate their exploits, in historical novels that reconstruct their lives, in video games that allow us to impersonate them. They have become romantic heroes, symbols of strength and courage, but also icons of a brutality and ferocity that fascinate and disturb us at the same time. But how much do we really know about their history beyond cinematic simplifications? How much suffering, how much blood was shed on the sand of the arenas to entertain an entire empire? In your opinion, were gladiators just victims of a deeply cruel and ruthless world, forced into a life of violence and death? Or were they also, in a certain sense, true heroes in the eyes of the people, admired for their courage and skill? Were gladiatorial shows pure and simple entertainment for a bloodthirsty society? Or were they a form of legalized and spectacularized torture? Write it in the comments. I want to hear your opinion on this controversial and fascinating figure of ancient history.